Well, how about that Nebraska basketball team? How many of you weren't even a fan 6 months ago? Bandwagon life, isn't it great? Hey, Nebraska weather also no joke. Here today, gone tomorrow. I don't know. It's crazy. The ups and the downs. A few months back, I got a letter in the mail, more of a postcard, really. It informed me that I was selected for my governmental duties to serve on jury duty. It's actually the first time in my life that I've gotten selected, which I'm really surprised by because I'm old. I'm getting older, right? And yet at the same time, not excited. Some of you are true crime junkies and you'd be all over this and you're like, yes. I'm like, boring. I don't care what it's about. Like, I've been in the courtroom, right? It is not court TV. You know, where that trial is over in like 5, 10, 15, maybe 60 minutes at most. It's not that. Like, I've sat in there like, yeah, you know, when you go in for the arraignments and things like that, there are some pre-trial stuff that like you're in and out. You play the waiting game and there's just that quick answer like, yep, we'll schedule that for in 2 weeks. Got it. Right? But if you've been through that cycle and you've sat in that courtroom, you know that if you're actually on trial, that could take about a year to get you to trial. And I've sat in the courtroom whenever people are sharing their testimonies, especially the first responders, and they're like reading from their notes because they have no idea what happened a year ago. Right? And so they're trying their best just to give an accurate account of everything that's going on. And I just know that can be rough. And I sat through some of the Stephen Avery stuff, The Making of a Murderer. Did anybody catch that on Netflix? Like, that was a big thing a number of years ago. And so you're just trying to follow this. Like, is he innocent? Is he guilty? And I can't imagine what it would be like to be in a court proceeding where you know that you're innocent and things are going against you. And I'm not saying that's his case or not his case, but I do know that case has happened for some people. Consider, for instance, Marvin. 1982, Marvin was 18 years old. He was a volunteer firefighter, and he was identified as the culprit by a victim of a really bad rape. Not that there's a really good one. And so he's identified. How was he mistaken? Well, they presented the victim with a photo array of different possibilities, and then in a short time later did a photo lineup, and he was the only face that was in the previous photos that was in the photo lineup. And so he was identified. Now, later on, a guy by the name of John Otis Lincoln confessed to the rape that he was accused of. And yet he was still locked up in prison. He couldn't fight this. The court wasn't allowing anything to happen, and they had lost the evidence that was supposed to be a part of the rape kit and the DNA evidence. And it was in 1994. Remember, this happened in 82. 94, he finally got in with the Innocent Project. And in 1997, he got paroled. But not like totally free. Even though he had somebody else that confessed, he was still getting registered as a sex offender. He still had an ankle monitor, and no longer was he able to do the job that he'd always dreamed of, being a firefighter. It was a few years later, in 2001, when DNA evidence actually proved his innocence, and the governor of Virginia gave him a pardon. But at that point, he'd already spent 15 years in prison, 4 years on parole. Fortunately, like, he came out of that being able to hold down a full-time job as a truck driver, serving on the board of directors for the Innocence Project, and also being a district chief for a volunteer fire department, but not after having lost nearly 20 years of his life. Can you imagine what it would be like to have someone in your life that you're pretty certain is innocent, and yet they're going through all of this stuff? And there's nothing you can do or say about it. It just seems like the deck is stacked. I think that probably most of us would be agonizing over the whole ordeal, trying to find anything, fight everything, give every dollar that we ever had to try to prove the innocence of someone that we care about. There's one more story. His name is William. In 1872, William and his friend John were traveling to Kansas to try to get a job with the railroad. And they stopped in Nebraska at William's mother-in-law's house on the travels. And by morning, John was gone. Nobody knew where John went. And so everybody thought that William had murdered his friend. A year later, a body turned up in that vicinity. And of course, this is the 1800s, like the testing and stuff that we have today just wasn't available. Everybody just assumed that this body was the body of John. And so William was put on trial, and he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. He appealed. It went back. He fought that. Didn't win the appeal either. And he was actually sentenced to death. And he was hung on March 25th, 1887. 4 years later, John shows up alive. John had been in Mexico. Why? Because he'd been with a girl who said, "You're the father of my son. You have to marry me." And he didn't want to get married. So he cut out and went to Mexico. It was 100 years later that William was pardoned by the state of Nebraska. Isn't that crazy? The kind of things that can sometimes happen. So we've been going through this series of events in Jesus' last few days in human form on this earth. And so we're going to be in Matthew 26 today. The verses aren't on the screen like we've been doing, just because we're going to be right in that same pocket of Scripture the whole time. So whether you're on a phone or an iPad or you got a Bible, just go ahead and pull that out. Go to Matthew chapter 26. And leading up to this, we stopped in the upper room at the table, right, where Jesus had invited his betrayer, Judas, because he'd been with him for 3 years. They're sitting at the table and they're celebrating the Passover and they're remembering the provisions of God. And there Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. An opportunity to really pass on forgiveness to the people. And so we talked about the seat of betrayal and how sometimes we can be in that seat, but yet even then, Jesus offered us the seat of forgiveness. Last week, Pastor Josh took us to the garden. It's there in the garden that we see the ultimate betrayal of Judas with a kiss. As we talked about in our small group, hey friend, just backstabbing his leader, his master. Peter comes to his defense, drawing his sword, cutting off the guard's ear. Not before the disciples, they followed Jesus for a moment of prayer, where he's just praying that God would take this away from him, that he wouldn't have to die. And he asks his disciples to stand watch, to stay alert, and yet they couldn't keep their eyes open. And now Jesus has been arrested. 3 years. 3 years they've been investing their time with Jesus. They've left everything. Their workplaces, their families. And they've seen everything Jesus has done. Sick people being made well, lame people able to walk, blind people able to see. He's able to see the weather under control. Thousands fed by such a small amount. Lazarus called out of the grave. They were able to see it all. And yet they get to the point where Jesus is taken away. And we put ourselves in the position of Peter. He's given all of this, done all of this, been with all of this, and now Jesus is taken away. He says, I won't deny you, and he comes to fight. And yet he's reprimanded. And then we enter into chapter 26, verse 57. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the Pharisees had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. A lot of times whenever we get put into these intense situations, we're given one of two options, and there's also another that sometimes is tossed into it, but fight or flight, or freeze, right? And so Peter came out swinging, not just his fist, his sword. Peter was a fighter, but reprimanded. And now all the other disciples, they've scattered. Well, John chapter 18 tells us that John was there too with Peter. But the others had left. And Peter, he's not like right in the action, but he's kind of caught in the middle. He's caught between courage and cowardice. Between courage and cowardice. You see, I think that sometimes we do have bold courage and we want to fight and we want to be engaged and we want to do everything we can. And sometimes we just want to tuck tail and hide, get away from the situation. But I would argue most of the time we're caught between courage and cowardice. We want to say something, but we're not quite sure what to say. So we don't really say anything. We want to stand up. We don't want to run away. But we kind of just sit on the sideline, not really doing much of anything. And this is where we find Peter as we enter into this section of the Scripture. He's following, but at a distance. I wonder how many of us today are following Jesus, but we're keeping our distance. We're following, but we lack the courage to follow closely. And we believe enough that we just haven't tucked tail and run. I know, because you're here, right? You're wanting to follow. You're wanting to believe. But sometimes that has a high cost. And so you stay back. I also want you to focus in on where they're at. So the high priest is there. He's the one that leads over something called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin would be like the court for the Jews. And on this Sanhedrin, there's 71 spots. The high priest is there. Pharisees, Sadducees. So those are two like political but religious leadership groups. You also have the elders, the leaders, the experienced people of the Jewish culture. And you have within it also some scribes. They're the teachers of the law. They're the ones that take the law and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. And they've dug in and they've dug in. They know the text. And the Sanhedrin is made up of this group. And when they would try something, they had the special courtroom that they would go to do that. But here we see this is a gathering of the people, not at the courtroom where it's legal, but actually at the home of the high priest, which is not legal. As they're gathered together, some of the people are there. This is the meeting before the meeting. I don't know if you've ever been the victim of a meeting before the meeting. You know, you walk into the meeting, but your head's already on a platter. You've lost your job, but you didn't even get a chance to defend yourself because there was a meeting before the meeting. That kind of thing. And so they're already meeting, and they're already plotting and the scheming of how they're going to do this. So we move from Jesus' followers keeping their distance to the Sanhedrin, the court, looking for a witness. Now, most of the time when you're looking for a witness, you want some people to tell you what actually happened. If we're not careful, we already have a verdict in mind, and we try to find evidence to support our verdict. Sometimes that happens with science today. Sometimes that happens with court proceedings today. Sometimes that just happens in our life. We already believe something, and we just try to find the evidence to support it. And so let's dive into Matthew 26, verse 59. And now the chief priests and the whole council, they were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. They're seeking testimony that they might put him to death, which means they've already got the verdict in their head. They've already determined the outcome, and now they want witnesses to support the outcome they desire. However, I do think the word false was probably put there by Matthew, the author of this letter, sometime before. Right? Matthew has already gathered this evidence. He's already lived this. And sometime later, he's writing it down, the story of Jesus. And he says false testimony. He knew it was false. He knew it was false. But I don't know that we can necessarily stand on ground that the Sanhedrin said, hey, let's go gather some false testimony. They were looking just for testimony to support a conclusion they'd already made. Verse 60 tells us that they didn't find any, though many false witnesses came forward. At least 2 of them came forward, though, and said, this man, Jesus, said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, they would have understood the temple to be a building, a structure, where they went inside to worship God, to offer their sacrifices. And this account is found in John chapter 2. But Jesus is actually making a metaphor. He is the temple. He's the dwelling place of God. And He is going to give His life as a sacrifice. And 3 days later, He's going to be resurrected. Right? He's speaking in mystery. But He's doing it pretty profoundly to talk about what's yet to come. Anyway, that's the best they could do. All these witnesses come forward. 2 guys share this story. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? Was it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. If we were to dig into the Old Testament prophecies, we would know that Jesus, the Messiah, was going to be silent like a sheep before the shepherd. False words, false testimony before the Sanhedrin in an illegal meeting. It just doesn't add up. But this is what Jesus walked into. The court system was rigged. The deck was stacked. And yet Jesus remained silent. Are there any times in your life where you feel like the odds are against you? You want to speak up and you want to speak out, but you realize, like putting your opinion on a public post, it's going to be shot down in a hurry. And you'd better off just saving your breath. 63. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you, by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ. That means the anointed king, the Son of God. The witness testimony didn't work. Now I'm just going to be direct. Are you him? Are you the Christ, the Son of God? And Jesus said to him, you have said so. Not me, you. You're the ones that said this. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. He's quoting from Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. He knows exactly what he's doing. Because if he keeps his mouth shut, he can stay alive. If he speaks, he's probably going to die. And yet he utters this prophecy, laying it out there again in mystery. But the truth of the matter is coming. They know exactly what he's saying. And the high priest tore his robe, a sign of sorrow, of agony, of disbelief, right? Because he has blasphemed, in his opinion, God. He has equated Jesus being a man with Jesus as the Son of God. And this cannot possibly be true in his mind. And so Jesus is guilty of blasphemy, the unforgivable sin. What further witnesses do we need, he says. You have heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they answered, he deserves death. The death sentence they had already been looking for. And then they spat in his face. And they struck him. And they slapped him. And they said, prophesy to us, you Christ, you King. Who is it that struck you? Jesus is put on trial, deck stacked against him. His followers have left him. At best, few of them are following at a distance, just kind of waiting for the end of the story. and the people he came to save, denying him and sentencing him to death. Have you ever been tempted to leave Jesus because the cost is too high? Because maybe he's asking you to leave behind a friendship or a relationship with a close family member because they don't agree. You lost a job because of your faith. Have you ever been tempted to leave Jesus because the cost is too high? Goes on in verse 69. Peter, who's been listening at a distance now, is sitting outside the courtyard. And a servant girl came up to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them, saying, "I do not know what you mean." And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, to everybody who was around, "This man was with Jesus the Nazarene." And he denied it again on oath, saying, "I do not know the man." And after a little while, he came up, while the bystanders came up, and they said to him, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. We can tell you from the Northland." And he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. If you've heard the story before, this doesn't shock you at all. But this takes us back to verse 31. And Jesus says, "This night you will all leave me." Tonight. It's going to happen. Peter is ever bold and is ever confident. Steps in, he says, "You know what? Even if everybody leaves you, I will never leave you." To which Jesus responds, "Before the rooster crows." When do roosters crow? In the morning. "Before morning comes, you will deny me 3 times. Peter, following at a distance, backpedaling from these opportunities to stand up for Jesus. The alarm goes off. His heart sinks. And it says he went out and he wept bitterly. Peter was a broken man because he knew that he missed his opportunity to stand up for Jesus. Is there ever a time that you miss the opportunity to stand up for Jesus? You're feeling the tug on your heart to have a conversation with somebody. But you're like, "I don't know how they're going to respond to this, so I'll just keep to myself." Because I'm kind of caught in the middle between courage and cowardice. I know I should. What if they treat me differently? What if they reject me? What if I'm not a part of the inner circle anymore? I don't get invited to the things. I miss out on the conversations because now I've put my faith out there and I'm an outcast because I didn't stand up for Jesus. Then Jesus received his life sentence the next day. Matthew 27 opens up with this. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders and the people took counsel against Jesus. Again, we're talking about the Sanhedrin. It's the next day. They're not supposed to convict somebody on the same day. There has to be a night in between. And so they're fudging the numbers a little bit here. We're gathered together, but it's not in official capacity the night before. But we have actually slept on it, so we're good. We're not supposed to meet outside of the courtroom, but tomorrow we'll meet inside the courtroom. But we've had the meeting before the meeting, so we already know what we're going to do when we get there. They came together and they took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and they led him away and they delivered him over to Pilate the governor. So he's officiating over the land on behalf of the Roman government. Why would they do this? Because the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, didn't have the power to execute the death penalty. They could convict, but they couldn't execute. And so they'd have to go to Rome to do that. Now, the charge that they're bringing is blasphemy to Pilate, the governor who doesn't believe in God. And so we read on and we see how this kind of gets adjusted a little bit. Verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus again said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave no answer, not even a single charge. And so the governor was greatly amazed. You got to imagine, he's so used to this, and people come in with so many excuses. Right? I've just always done it that way. Well, if you knew my parents, you would know why I'm this way. Right? I didn't mean to do that. It was just this one time. It's not as bad as you thought it was. And they're making up all sorts of excuses about why they shouldn't get the death penalty, about why they shouldn't be on trial. And Jesus, nothing. Nothing. No words. Luke says that Jesus was accused of misleading the nation, inciting people to not pay their taxes. He was claiming that he was king. That's what we would call treason. Right? To equate yourself with the Roman emperor. To not pay taxes to Caesar. This was Jesus. Verse 24. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather a riot was beginning, he took water and he washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." I don't know if it was cultural to do that. I do know that it was for the Jews. And my guess is Pilate was inciting from the Jews exactly what the Jews did to ritually cleanse themselves before entering in. And so he took something from their life and used it in his own defense. I am free of this man's blood, it's on you. And he passed the buck, as any great politician would do, right? He passed the buck right on to the other people, which in this case they gladly accepted. Gladly accepted. It says, and the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." And then he released for them Barabbas. We'll get into him next week. And having scourged Jesus, they delivered him to be crucified. So I want to tell you that Jesus is on trial every day in the court of public opinion. In your life, Jesus is on trial every day. And you have an opportunity to be a witness for or against Jesus. You have an opportunity to stand up and be courageous for Jesus, or to tuck tail and run. You're even going to be tempted to sit in the middle between courage and cowardice. Keep your mouth shut. Afraid of hurting people. Afraid of being isolated yourself. Afraid of actually standing up. But in that moment of complacency, in that moment of fear, you're going to be in the very place that Peter was, on the outside looking in. And at some point, the rooster will crow. And you'll get hit with that wave, and my guess is it'll be overwhelming. I just hope it happens here and not at the end of times, where it's like, oh, you don't know the man. I'm going to give you a few questions to help take this to a deeper place in your life. When have you had or felt like you were caught in between courage and cowardice? When have you felt like you were caught between courage and cowardice? Has there ever been a time that you have been wrongly accused? How did that feel? Take yourself there for a moment. Can you think of a time that you didn't stand up for Jesus? The nudge was there, but the action wasn't. You missed the opportunity. Were you convicted like Peter was? Did it draw you to mourn, to weep bitterly? Here's probably the most profound question of them all. What will you do to stand with Jesus moving forward? What will you do to stand with Jesus moving forward? In your classroom, on the ball field, in the stands watching the game, in your workplace. You see, it's easy to stand for Jesus inside of these walls. It's a lot harder to stand for Jesus when you're in a group of people that are kind of hostile towards Jesus. When it might cost you relationships. When you might stand out in the crowd. When you might not be invited to be a part of the in crowd. But that's your call. Will you stand up for Jesus moving forward? Around the room, there are a number of invite cards to our Easter services. Now, I know the easy thing is this, to do nothing. The next easiest thing to do is, here's a card, you should come to church. And I can tell you that if we have thousands of people show up on Easter Sunday, and all they did was ever sit in a chair and go, yes, Team Jesus, but didn't have the conviction in their heart to actually follow Jesus, we wouldn't win. Let me define for you what a win would look like. A win for me, when I'm looking out at our church, I would define it this way. We have a group of people that know that Jesus made an impact on their life, and they can't help but tell people in their life how Jesus stood up for them, how Jesus forgave them, how Jesus restored them. And when you have that conversation with that couple who's going through challenges in their relationship, you are their pastor. When you go into your workplace and somebody's having a rough day, maybe they're strung out and they can't find light at the end of the tunnel, you are their pastor. When you knock your neighbor's door just to get to know them, and they start opening up about an estranged child, you're their pastor. When you look into your community and you see people who are hurt, who are broken, and who are lost apart from Jesus, you actually care enough to stand up for Jesus. That would be the win. And if we can be that church, I guarantee you we will make an impact in our community. We will connect people in the Columbus area to Jesus Christ. But not if we continue to live in cowardice or caught in the tension. So will you do that? Father, my prayer is that you would illuminate for us the places in our life where we've pulled back, we've withdrawn in fear, or we've stood in the middle. We're not unbelieving, but we're not moving in faith either. Would you give us courage? Courage to stand for you. Courage to share our testimony, our story about how you've changed our life. Courage to dig into your word. Courage to share that word with other people. May the people in our lives, the people we go to the ball games with, the people that we work with, go to school with, engage in our community, our neighborhoods with, may they know that Jesus is alive and well because he's alive and well in our hearts. Would you help us to give people the reason for the hope that we have, which is Jesus Christ. And Father, this Easter, My prayer is that not just the people that are calling Connection home today, but the people that will call Connection home over the next few years will come in and learn about Jesus. And even more importantly, because of their relationship with you, heaven will be a little bit more full. Help us to just have a heart for those who are lost. Be willing to tell them about you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.